This video, we're going to be looking at just the basics of UV mapping and unwrapping in Blender. And so let's just start off with adding our typical Blender cube. And then let's add a material first. So I'll go over to shading, and then we'll create our material. And I covered some of this in a prior video, but we'll do it again. And I created this great image texture, and I'll post a link for how we kind of, walk through some of these steps with just my basic base image, and then I created a normal and a roughness texture as well. And these are kind of my most simplistic breakdown in when I'm kind of creating material. If I'm not wanting to spend too much time and kind of add some of the other nodes as well. But I'm curious, I'm always curious what other people kind of do for like their kind of like base. So then I'll kind of connect these accordingly. I'll add my color to my image texture, and then I'll connect my roughness to my roughness, and making sure that I'm actually switching this to non-color for my roughness because it is just black and gray. And then I'll create a converter node for my normal map and go ahead and connect that as well. And I just have my kind of basic material, but this isn't lining up. But this is where our UV mapping and unwrapping kind of come into play. I'll switch that to my color too. And UV is our X and Y coordinates for our textures because the X, Y, and Z is already taken for our modeling. So we use U as the horizontal texture axis and V as our vertical. So if we go over to our UV editing, you can kind of see how this is already unwrapped, which for the most part is kind of great. It has like this, T-type shape, so we can actually shrink these images down so they kind of align better with that. So if I have this image, I can actually actually select my whole UV layout. So this is kind of what, this looks like when it's actually unwrapped and placed over on our image. So if I were to scale this up and line this up, you can actually just fit this so it lines up better. And let me actually switch this over to our modeling. So you can actually see how this aligns a lot better to actually fit on this crate. And for the most part, that's essentially, it's kind of already does a lot of the work for us. Now we can actually unwrap this in a variety of ways as well. We can kind of set up our own, um, have more control over how this lines up. The first way you can kind of do it too is, especially this, it comes in handy when you're kind of having more complex objects. So if I were to select, you know, everything on this object or all my faces, and I just can go to, um, unwrap this way. You can also do a smart UV project, which will kind of convert it to however, it breaks it down. And again, you can kind of take this up if you wanted to and scale it so everything kind of fits a little bit better and aligning it accordingly. If you want more control over how these actually line up, you can simply select these individual edges and create seams. And if you kind of think of seams like a sewing pattern, that's essentially what we're doing here. So if you go to mark seam, this is actually where it's going to kind of make those cuts. And the good practice is, again, to kind of think of how you can do this in a way that it will still have it as, all connected, rather than having like, these separate floating. I have these seams like in a sewing pattern that when I can, if I actually unwrap this, go to UV unwrap, it creates again kind of like this, T, structure or pattern UV map that we had before. Then you just kind of have more control over where everything's going to unwrap to. And then you could simply, if you wanted to, again, like, rescale it so everything lines up and kind of fits. And this is, again, kind of a quick way of doing it. What I'm going to do next is I'm actually going to export this layout into something like Photoshop, and then we can actually have even more control over like where these faces, have more control over these individual faces. So if I go to, let's create just a new image texture that's, yeah, that's good. We'll just call this UV layout 1K, um, new image. And then I'll shrink this down so it fits within that. And then I'm going to go to UV, export UV layout, and then I'll put it in my crate folder. And I have, you know, we'll call this cube UV layout. And then I'll go ahead and open it up in Photoshop. And then again, this is kind of low resolution, but it gives you an idea. So then create images, and then you can go ahead and create another layer and actually paste these and actually kind of almost like you're drawing on where over kind of like this map that you created. And now I can have, different slides that are all going to line up to actually my UV map that I just created. I could probably do a better job lining this up, but and then I would probably go ahead and create, my normal and um my roughness and everything accordingly based off this as well. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to export the image. I'll just say create um, unwrap. I don't know. That's what I'm going to call it. So now I go back into Blender and let's just go over to our shading and then I'll just adjust. You know what? I'll actually pop in a different texture here. Let's go to back to material and then I can just drag and drop this crate texture I just created and everything aligns up. And again, like this will make more sense as your objects and your materials get more complex.